On a quiet stretch of highway, a black woman in a gray sedan watches red and blue lights flash behind her, her son humming softly under his headphones in the back seat. She pulls over without resistance, but the officers don't come for paperwork. They come with suspicion in their eyes and force in their hands. The questions sharpen, the commands escalate, and within moments, she's on the ground, bleeding beside her car, her son screaming as he's dragged away. They think they've made an example, but they don't know who she called. They don't know the man heading toward them, a Navy SEAL trained to dismantle threats and never leave his own behind. And when he arrives, everything will change. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The highway was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you check your mirrors more often, even when there was nothing to see but trees stretching long and dark on either side. Renee kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting loosely in her lap, her shoulders slightly tense, despite the calm music playing low through the speakers. The clock on the dash read 9:42. She had told her son's friend's mother she wouldn't stay long. Just a quick pickup and back on the road. And she hadn't. 10 minutes there. 15 at most. Long enough to be polite, short enough to get Malik home, showered, and in bed before 10. In the back seat, Malik sat slouched, his head tilted against the window, his headphones on, the soft blue light of his tablet casting a faint glow across his cheek. He was humming something, barely audible, but Renee recognized it, old Kanye. The kind of music Derek used to play around the house when Malik was younger. The kind with beats heavy enough to stick, but lyrics soft enough for a 10-year-old to memorize. That made her smile for a second, just long enough to exhale and feel the tension slip slightly from her spine. Then the headlights appeared behind her, climbing fast. She checked her rearview mirror. A cruiser, dark, wide, riding her bumper like it had nowhere else to be. No lights, no siren, just there, close, watching. Renee blinked, signaled, and moved to the right lane. It followed. She adjusted her speed, hovering just under the limit. The cruiser stayed locked behind her for nearly a full minute before the red and blues finally lit up. She let out a breath, blinked again, and eased the car over to the shoulder, the tires crunching against loose gravel until the vehicle came to a complete stop beneath a patch of hanging trees. She placed the car in park and tapped the hazard lights. Malik didn't notice. He was still humming, swiping through something on his screen. She didn't say anything to him yet. No need to worry him. Not yet. 2 doors opened. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed through the still air as the cruiser's interior lights flared briefly behind them. Renee rolled her window down halfway and rested both hands visibly on the steering wheel, just like she'd practiced 100 times in her head. She glanced up through the mirror and caught a glimpse of the officers approaching. White, mid-30s, both tall, with that same rigid posture that never looked casual, no matter how slow they walked. The one on the driver's side stopped just short of the window. The other flanked the passenger side, staying back just enough to stay out of her direct line of sight. She didn't like that. "Evening, ma'am," the first one said, leaning in just enough for her to see the glint of his badge. His tone was stiff, not unkind, but hollow in that way that felt rehearsed. "Mind telling us where you're headed tonight?" Renee nodded slowly, keeping her tone light. "Just headed home. Picked up my son from his friend's house. We're a few miles from the turnoff now." He didn't smile. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Renee Coleman." "You own this vehicle, Mrs. Coleman?" "I do. Would you like to see my license and registration?" "I'd appreciate that." She reached slowly into her purse on the passenger seat, her fingers moving deliberately as she retrieved her wallet. Then opened the glove compartment for the registration and insurance slip. She handed them both out the window with a steady hand. The officer took the documents, but didn't look at them immediately. Instead, he studied her face, lingering just long enough for the pause to stretch. Then he turned and walked back toward the cruiser without another word. The second officer remained in place on the passenger side, eyes now flicking toward the back seat. Renee saw him lean forward, just enough to look inside. Malik was still unaware, tapping through the end of a video, a faint smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. The officer knocked on the window. Not hard, but not soft either. Malik flinched and looked up. Renee spoke immediately, clear and firm. "Sir, my son is 10 years old. He's not part of any investigation." The officer didn't respond, just kept staring. She turned in her seat and placed a hand lightly on the back of Malik's arm. "It's okay, baby. Just stay seated and keep your headphones on." He nodded, slower this time, and pulled the headset back over his ears, eyes still darting between the officer's face and his mother's hand. The first officer returned and stood by her window again, now holding her documents loosely between two fingers. "Your registration checks out," he said. But the tone hadn't shifted. "But we had a report earlier tonight about a vehicle matching this description. Same color, similar plate sequence, stolen car, possibly headed this direction. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Renee didn't move. "This is my car. Purchased last year, financed under my name. I just handed you the paperwork." "I know what you handed me," he replied. And now the edge was there, slight but unmistakable. "I'm just doing my job. Mind stepping out of the vehicle for a moment, ma'am?" She blinked. "On what grounds?" "Routine check." She stared at him. "I've done nothing wrong. You said my registration checks out." "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again." And just like that, the air shifted. The polite mask cracked. Not completely, but enough for the real thing to show through. She could feel it, the weight of it pressing down all around her, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because he'd decided she was going to be a problem. And out here, with no other cars on the road, with no gas stations or open stores in sight, being a problem meant she was going to have to make a choice. Not between right and wrong, but between safe and unsafe. She opened the door slowly. Renee stepped out of the SUV with both hands still visible, careful not to close the door too hard behind her. The gravel crunched softly beneath her flats, and the breeze tugged at the hem of her blouse as she straightened. The officer, Maddox, she now saw from the name on his badge, didn't give her much room, positioning himself just a step too close, his eyes scanning her face with the kind of look that wasn't about curiosity or concern, but control. The other one, Renner, was still near the passenger side, still watching Malik, though he hadn't said a word. Maddox spoke first. "You said you were coming from a friend's house?" "My son's friend. I picked him up. We stayed 10 minutes. "Which friend?" "His name's Carter. His mom's name is Alicia." He raised an eyebrow. "Got a last name on either of those?" "I don't see how that's relevant." "It's relevant when we're trying to figure out where you've really been tonight." She kept her expression even. "I've told you the truth. I'm driving straight home." Maddox gave a dry smile, one that didn't touch his eyes. "You know, it's funny," he said, glancing back toward the SUV. "A lot of people who steal cars say the same thing." Renee didn't answer. She kept her arms relaxed by her sides, her back straight, her voice calm. "You've seen my license, my registration. Both are in order. You have no reason to believe this vehicle is stolen." He ignored that. "Mind popping the trunk for me?" "I do mind." That got his attention. He tilted his head. "Come again? You don't have a warrant. I'm not consenting to a search." "Ma'am, you're making this harder than it has to be, and you're pushing past the limits of what's legal." "I've done nothing wrong." Maddox let out a slow breath through his nose and took a step forward, forcing her to shift her weight slightly to avoid contact. "You think this is about legality?" he asked, voice dropping. "Out here, it's about making sure everyone gets home safe. That includes you. That includes your kid. Now, if you've got nothing to hide—" "I don't," she cut in, not loud but firm, "and I don't have to prove that by letting you search my property without cause." For a moment, neither of them moved. Maddox's eyes narrowed just slightly. The moment stretched. Too long for comfort, too quiet for safety. Then, without a word, he turned and started walking back toward the cruiser, Renee's documents still folded in his hand. She glanced toward her car. Malik had pulled one headphone halfway off and was watching now, eyes wide, his small face lit only by the soft overhead dome light inside the SUV. Renner finally spoke, his voice quieter, but no less sharp. "Everything all right over there?" "She's being difficult," Maddox said, as he reached the rear of her vehicle. "Might be hiding something." Renee raised her voice enough for both of them to hear. "I'm not hiding anything. I've complied. I've answered your questions. I just won't allow an illegal search." That earned a scoff from Maddox. "You read that in a pamphlet or something. I know my rights." "That's so?" he said, circling now along the passenger side where Renner stood. "Because I think the courts tend to side with the badge, not with roadside lawyers." He reached the rear door and gave it a quick pull. It didn't open. Renee had locked it when she got out. "Unlock the door," Maddox said flatly. "No," she answered. "My son is 10. You don't need to speak to him. You have no reason to question him or remove him from the vehicle." "Ma'am," Renner said now, stepping forward, "we're conducting an investigation." "There is no investigation. You stopped me without cause, insulted me, and now you're trying to intimidate my child." "That's enough," Maddox snapped, raising his voice for the first time. "Unlock the door. Now." Renee took a breath, slow and controlled. "I will not." And just like that, Maddox's hand shot toward his belt. He pulled something from his side, not a weapon, but his flashlight, heavy and metal. He brought it down against the window in a loud, deliberate thump. Not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to send Malik scrambling backward in his seat, his small body curling instinctively toward the middle of the SUV. "Open the door!" "Stop it!" Renee shouted, stepping forward. But Renner blocked her path. "You're interfering," he warned. "He's a child." "Then maybe act like his parent and cooperate." Malik's door clicked unlocked from the inside, the sound small but sharp in the still air. Renee's heart seized. "No," she said, pushing past Renner before he caught her by the arm, spinning her back toward the gravel. That's when Maddox yanked the door open. Malik's face was pale, his hands shaking as he held the tablet close to his chest like a shield. Maddox reached in without hesitation, grabbing the boy by the upper arm. "Out! He didn't do anything!" Renee cried, trying to wrench her arm free from Renner's grip. "He's a child!" "He's in a stolen vehicle," Maddox said coldly. "That makes him part of this." Renee stumbled forward, slipping in the loose gravel, but Renner shoved her back hard. She hit the ground with a cry, her knee scraping against the sharp edge of a rock. Malik was out now, dragged gently but firmly by the arm, his feet struggling to keep up, his breathing rapid and shallow. The moment she saw his chest start to hitch, she knew what was coming, the silent kind of panic. The kind that Malik had dealt with during storms, during fire drills, during nights when Derek had been deployed for too long, and the house had felt too empty. His lips were already parting, hands rising as though trying to pull air down into his lungs. But nothing was sticking, nothing was working. Renee struggled to get up, the panic in her own chest rising, but Renner's boot pressed against her shoulder, holding her down just enough to keep her out of reach. Maddox grabbed at his cuffs. The boy was barely breathing. Malik's chest was heaving now, his mouth open as if trying to catch something that kept slipping away. His knees buckled once and he staggered, dropping the tablet onto the pavement where it cracked against the road's edge, the screen blinking and going black. His arms flailed slightly, not in resistance but in confusion, as though he couldn't understand why the world had turned on him so fast. Renee screamed his name, but the boot on her shoulder pinned her to the gravel, grinding the sharp stones into her skin. Maddox wasn't looking at her. His attention was fixed on Malik, though not with concern, not even curiosity, but with the same grim set he might have worn dragging a drunk out of a bar. He pulled the boy's wrists behind his back, his large hands swallowing the child's frame with frightening ease. "Stop! Please!" Malik gasped out, the words coming out thin and cracked. "I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything." "Then hold still," Maddox barked, tightening the cuffs. "They're too tight," Malik whimpered, twisting instinctively, only to cry out when the metal bit into his wrists. Renee's voice broke as she tried again to rise. Please, please, you're hurting him. He's not resisting. Just let me. Renner shoved her back down with more force this time. Not enough to knock her out, but enough to steal her breath. She coughed against the gravel, eyes wide with disbelief, the taste of dust and iron creeping across her tongue. Malik tried again to speak, but his voice caught halfway up his throat and collapsed into shallow gasps. His whole body trembled, legs giving way as he sank to the ground, his shoulders hitching in a rhythm Renee knew too well, the spiral that always came before the full shutdown. His eyes darted around wildly now, no longer focused on anyone, his mouth working soundlessly, lips pale and quivering. I can't, he rasped, and his knees folded beneath him. He crouched down, but didn't let go. You better stop faking it. He's not faking, Renee choked out, pushing up again with trembling arms. He has anxiety. He's panicking. He needs to breathe. But Maddox didn't release him. I said stop. Malik's head lolled forward. His whole body sagged against the grip that held him upright. I can't see, the boy whispered. I can't see anything. Renee froze. That wasn't panic. That was the edge of something worse. Please, she begged, her voice raw now. Please, he's going to pass out. He needs me. Just let me help him. I'm begging you. Just let me go. You can help him by cooperating, Renner snapped, pulling her wrists behind her back. She felt the cold bite of metal close over her skin, the edge of the cuff scraping a line across her wrist as the second one clicked tight. She didn't fight, not because she agreed, but because Malik had gone limp. The stillness of his body, the way his head tilted forward, unmoving, it terrified her more than anything. I want my mom, Malak whispered, barely audible. I want to go home. I didn't do anything. Please, I just want to go home. Maddox shifted his grip, still holding him upright. Maybe you shouldn't ride in stolen cars, then. It's not stolen, Malik said, his voice breaking into a sob. It's not. It's our car. My dad bought it. Please don't take me. Please don't take me. He sounded smaller than he ever had before, like the voice of a much younger child trapped in a place he didn't understand. Renee had heard him cry before, had comforted him after nightmares, soothed him through storms, but this was different. This was the sound of something cracking, something she wasn't sure could be put back together. Why are you doing this? Malik sobbed, gasping now. I didn't even get out of the car. I was just listening to music. I was just listening to music. Why are you hurting me? Maddox finally let go, dropping him back against the ground like something heavy that had stopped moving. Malik curled into himself, face pressed against the road, breathing ragged and erratic. Renner pulled Renee up now, forcing her to her feet, the gravel ripping at her scraped palms as she staggered upright. You're going to stand right here and not move, he ordered, dragging her toward the front of the SUV. My phone, she stammered, trying to focus, trying to remember where it was. I dropped it. It was near the rear tire. Please. Not happening. I need to call my husband. You should have thought about that before you refused to cooperate. Renee's eyes scanned the ground as they dragged her forward. In the dim light from the cruiser, she caught the faint glint of the phone's case, half buried under a dusting of gravel. It had fallen just outside the reach of the rear wheel. She let herself go limp for a moment, forcing Renner to jerk her upright with a curse. Can't even stand on your own? I'm dizzy, she murmured, tilting her weight back. Too fast. Then lean here, he muttered, pushing her against the front bumper. He didn't see her hand drift slightly as she steadied herself. She dropped to her knees again. Not violently, just slow enough to seem disoriented, and let her hand press to the ground. Her fingers inched toward the phone, moving almost imperceptibly through the dust. Behind her, Maddox was muttering something over the radio, asking dispatch to confirm whether the plates matched the report he'd referenced earlier. But there was no urgency in his voice. He knew there wouldn't be a match. This wasn't about facts. It never had been. Her fingers closed around the corner of the phone. She pulled it close, shielding it beneath the hem of her blouse, fumbling until she found the power button. The screen lit up. No password needed. The emergency dial pad was already open. She dialed one number. Just one. It rang once, twice. And then a familiar voice came through, low and steady. "Renee?" Her voice trembled. "Derek! They've got him! He can't breathe! Please, please come now!" She didn't even hear the footsteps until the shadow fell across her shoulder. The voice that followed came too fast, too loud. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Renner's boot crashed against the ground inches from her knee as he reached down and yanked the phone from her hand. It slipped from her grasp and clattered across the pavement. The call still connected for a heartbeat before the screen went black under his thumb. "I told you no phone," he barked, his voice sharp and clipped now. No pretense of professionalism left in it. "You think this is a game?" Renee opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her jaw trembled as she raised one hand halfway. A small gesture, not to fight, not to argue, just to show him she wasn't trying to resist. But Renner didn't care. His hand grabbed her by the collar, jerking her upright with enough force to make her stumble. Gravel rolled under her shoes as she tried to steady herself, her shoulder slamming hard into the side of the SUV. From behind the vehicle, Malik let out another sob, louder now, hoarse and broken. He was still on the ground, his wrists bound tight behind his back, his breathing labored, his small frame shaking with every uneven breath. Renee tried to twist toward him, to speak, but Renner grabbed her by the chin, forcing her head to face him. "You think you're special?" he said, his breath hot and bitter as it hit her face. "You think your attitude means we're just gonna let you walk away?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on his, and for a moment, she didn't even blink. She didn't have to say anything. Her silence was defiant enough, and that was what did it. The first blow came from Maddox. She never saw it coming. His fist cracked across the left side of her face, just beneath the cheekbone. The sound, dull and sickening like wet cloth, dropped on concrete. The impact sent her backward, her head whipping to the side, her legs giving way instantly beneath her. She collapsed beside the front tire, her body half-twisted, one hand catching herself just before her head hit the pavement. The other reached up instinctively to her face. Warmth bloomed beneath her palm. Sticky, wet, blood. She didn't scream, not right away. The pain was sharp, but it came second to the shock, to the hollow ringing that replaced every sound. She could feel it, though. The slow, pulsing throb building behind her eye, the sting where the skin had split open under her eye socket, where his ring had carved a line down her cheekbone. Malik screamed for her. "Mom!" She turned, or tried to, but her balance was gone. Her hand slipped on the gravel, and she fell again. This time harder. The pavement scraped her knuckles, the sting barely registering through the haze in her head. "Stay down," Maddox growled, standing over her now. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she gasped, trying to lift herself up again, her vision blurring. "She reached for something," Renner said quickly, not even bothering to look at her as he echoed the lie. "We told her to stop." "I didn't reach for anything," she tried. But her voice cracked halfway through the sentence, the words swallowed by the taste of copper rising in her throat. Malik's cries hadn't stopped. His voice was fraying now, unraveling into jagged pieces. "Please stop. Please don't hurt her. Please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for whatever we did. Just stop hurting her." Renee forced herself upright, not all the way. Just enough to lift her face out of the dirt. To see her son. He was curled up near the back bumper now, his face twisted in anguish, his knees pulled to his chest, his arms still locked behind him. He couldn't wipe his tears. They streamed down freely, unchecked, cutting tiny rivers through the dust on his skin. Maddox crouched in front of her again. "Here's what's gonna happen. You're going to shut your mouth and stay where I tell you. And your boy's gonna keep quiet before he gets both of you into something you can't walk out of." "You assaulted me," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage and disbelief. You hit me while I was cuffed. That's battery. You know that. You know exactly what this is. No body cam on, he said simply, and shrugged. No one to hear it but you and me. Renner chuckled under his breath, dragging a hand over his chin as if it were all just an inconvenience. I called my husband, she said slowly, forcing the words out past her throbbing jaw. He's coming. Then he can watch you get arrested too. He's not going to let you touch his son. Maddox stood. Then I guess he'll get what's coming too. She didn't speak after that. There was no point. She let her head fall back, just enough to rest against the bumper of her car. Her vision swam. Her cheek throbbed in time with her pulse. Blood trickled past her jawline, down her neck, soaking into the collar of her blouse. Malik had gone quiet now, not because he was calm, but because he was breaking. She could see it. He had retreated into that small, distant place children go when the world is too cruel to understand. And just then, past the sound of Maddox's voice and the buzz of the cruiser's idle engine, she heard it. Far off at first. A low hum. Tires on pavement, growing louder. Not from behind, from ahead. A black SUV, moving fast. No hesitation, no turn signal. Just a blur of headlights slicing down the road like a warning. The hum rose quickly into a roar, gravel and dust spinning in its wake as the SUV surged forward with no signs of slowing. Headlights swept across the scene, locking onto the cruiser and the officers standing just beyond it. Maddox stepped back instinctively, his hand falling toward his belt, but his fingers hovered there just a second too long, uncertain whether to draw or posture. Renner turned, squinting into the brightness, muttering something under his breath, but neither of them moved with the confidence they'd had moments ago. The vehicle didn't stop gradually. It braked hard, the front end dipping as tires groaned against the shoulder. The doors opened before the engine finished cooling, and Derek stepped out into the open air like a shadow pulled from the dark. He wore no uniform, no badge, no armor, just a black t-shirt, jeans, boots, and a look that didn't belong to a man asking questions. His hands were empty, but his posture carried the quiet certainty of someone who had ended fights longer, messier, and louder than this. The muscles in his jaw didn't move. His eyes scanned the scene once, landing on Renee, on the blood on her face, on Malik, curled in the dirt with his hands behind his back, and then on the officers standing there like they still had the right to speak. "Step away from my wife and son," Derek said, his voice calm, too calm, the kind of calm that made both Maddox and Renner straighten just slightly, as if their instincts were whispering things their minds hadn't caught up to yet. Maddox blinked. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." "It does now. She's under investigation. And that child's being detained." Derek was already moving. Not running, just walking. Measured steps on loose gravel, each footfall deliberate, each one a warning. Renner moved to intercept first, unsure of what exactly he was trying to stop. His hand went out, not with force, just with the assumption that he could put it on Derek's chest, and that would be enough. It wasn't. Derek caught the wrist mid-air, turned his body with smooth precision, and used the officer's momentum against him. Renner hit the ground flat on his back. The wind knocked clean from his lungs, a stunned gasp rattling out of him as his limbs flailed briefly and stilled. Maddox's hand went for his holster. Slower now. Too slow. Derek closed the distance between them in 3 strides, knocking the officer's arm upward just as the grip cleared the leather. The gun clattered against the pavement and slid under the cruiser. A fist caught Maddox in the ribs before he could curse. Another slammed into his shoulder, spinning him off balance, and then the third came, low and sharp, directly into his thigh, sending him staggering sideways. Derek didn't hesitate. He reached out, grabbed Maddox by the vest, and slammed him into the side of the SUV hard enough to rattle the windows. "You hit my wife," Derek said softly, and then drove his elbow into the man's gut. Maddox doubled over, coughing, his hands scrambling against the door for leverage. Another blow followed. clean and sharp. A palm strike to the chin that sent the officer reeling backward, his legs folding beneath him. Renee watched all of it from where she knelt, blood still streaking her face. Her breath held so tightly in her lungs she didn't realize she was shaking until the dust began to settle. Maddox was down. Renner wasn't moving. The road was quiet again. Derek walked past them both and dropped to his knees beside his son. Malik flinched at first, the sound of footsteps still too close to fear. But as soon as he saw his father's face, the panic cracked. He burst into sobs, his shoulders shaking so violently he couldn't speak. Derek didn't ask him to. He just placed both hands gently on the boy's arms, lowered his head, and whispered something that didn't need to be heard by anyone else. Renee moved toward them, still on her knees, dragging herself those last few feet. Derek looked up and met her eyes, and for the first time since he arrived, something shifted in his expression. It wasn't anger. It was something older, deeper, the helpless kind of rage that builds in a man when he realizes he couldn't protect them soon enough. She reached for his hand. "I'm okay," she whispered. "He cuffed me, but I'm okay." "Your face," Derek murmured. "I'll live. Malik needs you. I've got him." Malik's hands were still bound. Derek found the cuffs and examined them, then stood, walked to Renner's belt, and retrieved the key without ceremony. He returned, knelt, and unlocked the restraints with quick, practiced movements. As soon as the metal opened, Malik threw his arms around his father's neck and buried his face against his shoulder. Derek held him there, held them both in place. Behind them, Maddox groaned, trying to crawl toward his gun. Derek turned, stood, and stepped directly onto the officer's hand. Maddox froze. "You move again," Derek said quietly, "and I'll put you back to sleep." And this time, Maddox believed him. The night stretched quiet once more. No backup had come, no sirens, just the thrum of the SUV engine and the sound of Malik's breathing, steady now, held safe in the arms of the only man in the world who had ever taught him that fear was not a place he had to stay in. Derek kept his foot pressed against Maddox's hand, just long enough to make sure the message was clear. The officer didn't fight it. He didn't speak. He didn't even look up. His breath came in short, uneven bursts. His body curled slightly, as if the weight of what had just happened was only now starting to settle across his ribs. Renner was still on the ground a few feet away, groaning low as he blinked up at the stars like they might offer him a reason none of this had just happened. Derek stepped back, crouched beside Renee, and checked her face without speaking, his eyes scanning the cut beneath her eye, the forming bruise along her jaw, and the blood that had dried into a crooked line across her cheek. She tried to wave it off, but he caught her wrist and held it gently, steadying her as he met her eyes again. "They'll come for us now," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "You know that." "I know," Derek replied, nodding once. "We won't be here when they do." He helped her to her feet first, then scooped Malik into his arms. The boy didn't argue, didn't ask to walk. He just clung to his father's neck and tucked his face close, his fingers curling into the back of Derek's shirt, like he was afraid to let go. Renee opened the SUV's rear door, clearing the seat as quickly as she could, brushing aside the broken tablet and adjusting the blanket Malik kept in the back for long rides. Derek placed him down gently, then leaned in close, resting one hand on the side of his son's head. "I need you to stay down low, okay? We're leaving. No matter what happens, I need you to stay down and stay quiet." Malik nodded slowly, eyes still wet, voice barely more than a whisper. "Are they coming back?" "Not if I can help it," Derek said. Renee climbed into the passenger seat without another word, wincing as she buckled her seatbelt, one hand pressed to her ribs where the pavement had scraped through the fabric of her blouse. Derek walked around the vehicle, took one final look at the two officers still struggling on the ground, then climbed in and threw the SUV into gear. The tires peeled off gravel as they sped away, back onto the road with nothing behind them but dust, pain, and the echo of threats that wouldn't be forgotten. For a while, no one spoke. The road ahead stretched long and empty, lit only by the faint glow of distant towns and the occasional flicker of roadside reflectors catching the headlights. Renee held a tissue to her face, her eyes fixed on the mirror, watching Malik behind them, checking every few seconds to make sure he was still breathing steady, still upright, still with them. Derek's hands stayed firm on the wheel, his gaze never leaving the road. His mind was already moving, thinking in patterns, calculating what they had, what they'd need, how far they could go before the story would catch up with them. "Where are we going?" Renee asked softly. "Franklin's cabin," Derek said without hesitation. "Backwoods. No cell towers. Solar power only. He's out in Texas right now, so we'll have the place to ourselves. We've got maybe a 3-hour window before they pull the body cam footage and start tracking plates." Renee leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. "They'll twist it. Say we attacked them. Say you ambushed them. Say I was hysterical." "They always do," Derek said. "That's why we can't rely on their version. We need our own. We don't have footage." "Not yet," he said. "But there might be dash cam from their cruiser, and if there's any nearby traffic cams, we'll find them." "And then what? Leak it? Go to the press?" "Both," Derek said, glancing briefly at her before turning back to the road. "But we need it first. Something they can't bury." Renee was quiet for a long time, the steady hum of the engine the only sound between them. Malik had dozed off in the back seat, but even in sleep, his hands twitched, small fists tightening every so often like his body hadn't yet let go of the fear. "You saved us," she said finally. Derek shook his head. "Too late." "No. You came." He didn't answer, but the way his grip shifted slightly on the steering wheel said more than enough. They reached the cabin just before midnight. The gravel path was hidden between 2 crooked mailboxes and a wall of overgrown brush that hadn't seen a trimmer in years. The place was small, weathered, and tucked deep into the woods, where no patrol car would bother to go unless they already knew what they were looking for. Derek parked beneath the trees and shut off the engine. The silence that followed felt thick, like the whole night had been holding its breath and had only just started to exhale. He helped Renee inside first, guiding her gently to the couch, where she sank down with a hiss of pain. Then he carried Malik in, laid him on the small bed in the corner, and covered him up with the same blanket he'd carried in the back seat. The boy didn't stir. Renee watched from the couch, her fingers pressed against the swollen edge of her cheek. "They'll say we ran. We did. They'll use that. I know." She looked up at him. "So, what do we do now?" Derek crossed the room, crouched beside the couch, and rested his forearm on the cushion. "We show the world what they did, on our terms, with our words, and when they come knocking, we'll be ready." Morning came without a sunrise. The cabin was still cloaked in blue-gray shadows, the kind of filtered light that barely cut through the trees. Inside, the quiet was deep. No engines, no sirens, no voices, just the sound of the wind brushing the side of the house and the low, constant rhythm of Malik's breathing as he slept. Derek had been up for hours. He stood near the far window, one hand resting against the worn frame, the other holding a pad of paper covered in notes and street names. His mind hadn't stopped since they'd arrived. Sleep had tried once, crept in somewhere between midnight and 2, but he'd pushed it back, kept himself moving with water and movement and the methodical rhythm of planning. He'd already made a list of surveillance camera locations, cross-checked the likely route that Cruiser had taken before and after the stop, and dug through an old lockbox of tech gear he'd left behind last fall, just in case. Behind him, Renee stirred on the couch. She didn't sit up right away, just shifted slowly, pressing a hand to her side where the bruises had started to bloom. Her face was swollen beneath the eye, the dried blood forming a tight line across her skin. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for anything. When she sat upright, it was with the kind of quiet pain she didn't want anyone to see. Derek turned from the window. "You need anything?" "I need to get that footage," she said, her voice rough from sleep but clear. "That's all I need." He nodded. "I think I know where to start. That cruiser they used, It would have been issued from the district lot on McAllister. They keep dashcam hard drives locked in the central server, but every car backs up to an external drive manually when it returns to the lot. It's old tech, still clunky, still flawed. But that's the weakness. Renee ran a hand down her face. You think it was recording? It usually auto-records any time the lights are on. Maddox was too focused on flexing power to think about turning it off. If it was running, that camera caught everything. The car position, his face, the blows, all of it. Even if it exists, we can't ask for it. You know that. I'm not asking, he said quietly. I'm taking. She looked up at him, startled. You're not going into the lot. No cameras in the overflow yard. The building has blind spots, and I know exactly where the old server crates are stored. If the backup wasn't overwritten, I can get it. Derek, it's the only way, he said simply. We can't out-talk them. We need proof. The raw kind. Unedited. Undeniable. She didn't argue, but she didn't look away either. All right, she said, after a long moment, but I'm going with you. No, you're not. I'm not staying behind while you walk into a police facility alone. You've got Malik to watch, and you'll be safer with someone watching your back. He started to protest, but she was already moving toward the kitchen, her body stiff, her breath shallow as she worked through the soreness. She didn't need to say it again. He knew her well enough to understand. She wasn't letting him go alone. By late afternoon, Malik was up and eating quietly at the kitchen table, a bowl of oatmeal half finished in front of him, his fingers still trembling slightly when they held the spoon. He hadn't said much that morning, just a few small answers, eyes always flicking toward the windows, toward the corners of the room, like he expected someone to barge in at any moment. Renee knelt beside him and brushed his hair back. We're going to get the video, baby. The one from the police car. The one that shows what they did to us. Once people see it, they'll know the truth. Will it show them hitting you? He asked, voice so small she almost didn't hear it. Yes, she said softly. It will. Will they believe it? She hesitated. They will have to. Derek set the backpack on the counter with a quiet thud, its contents already arranged. Gloves, a burner phone, a small laptop, 2 sets of clothes, and an encrypted drive. No weapons. This wasn't that kind of mission. He didn't need force. He needed precision. They drove out before sunset, taking back roads, avoiding the interstate, circling twice before parking near an abandoned lot 2 blocks from the department yard. Renee stayed low as they cut through an alley behind a row of empty businesses. The yard was mostly dark, save for a few high lamps casting long shadows across the chain-link fence. The back gate was secured with a rusted lock, but Derek handled it quietly, working the bolt until it slid free without so much as a sound. Inside, it was exactly as he remembered. Rows of parked units, half of them old cruisers waiting to be decommissioned. The far garage housed the server storage. He moved quickly, scanning the sides of the building, counting steps, watching the angles. Renee followed close, keeping pace, keeping lookout. Her body ached, but adrenaline dulled the edge. They reached the storage room, and Derek forced the door just enough to squeeze through. Inside, the air was musty and stale. Cables and drives stacked across aging shelves like forgotten relics. He worked fast, pulling records, tracing VIN numbers, locating the matching cruiser from last night's call log. The dash cam drive sat inside a secure dock. Old model, easily detached. He slid it free, wrapped it in cloth, and slipped it into the pack. They left the way they came, quiet, controlled, invisible. By the time they reached the cabin again, the moon was high, and Malik was asleep beneath a blanket with one of Renee's scarves tucked beside him. Derek placed the drive on the table between them and looked her in the eye. If it's on here, he said, they won't be able to lie their way out. Renee nodded. Let's find out. The drive clicked into the port with a soft snap. The room quiet enough that the sound felt louder than it was. Renee sat at the edge of the table, her hands braced on either side of the laptop, while Derek hovered behind her, arms crossed tightly across his chest, his jaw tight with tension that hadn't eased since they'd returned. A single desk lamp cast a narrow cone of light across the table, its yellow glow flickering slightly as the device began to load. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a folder opened, unnamed, unstyled, just a long string of letters and numbers. Inside were 3 video files, each time-stamped in sequence. Derek leaned forward and clicked the first one. It started without sound. The cruiser's interior showed 2 silhouettes in the front seats. Maddox in the driver's seat, Renner beside him, both sipping from paper cups. The dashboard clock blinking 9:31 p.m. As the footage rolled forward, the siren lights flicked on, their red and blue reflections washing over the inside of the vehicle. The cruiser accelerated, and a few moments later, the SUV came into view ahead on the road, pulling to the side. Renee said nothing. She didn't move. She just stared at the screen as the moment unfolded again in front of her, her hands on the wheel, the window rolling down, Maddox's approach. She watched herself from above, from behind, like she was witnessing a stranger's nightmare. The second file captured the exterior angle, the dash cam mounted above the windshield, angled low, wide enough to catch the gravel shoulder and part of the passenger side. It was all there. The way Maddox dropped her license, the way Renner circled the car before yanking open the back door, the way Malik's head snapped up in confusion. The panic etched across his small face as Maddox dragged him out. Renee watched her own body hit the ground, her voice loud and pleading, distorted slightly by the microphone, but unmistakable in tone and urgency. Then came the strike. Quick, brutal, undeniable. Maddox's fist arcing out of frame, her head snapping sideways. Derek paused the video. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Renee lowered her eyes to the keyboard, her voice barely a whisper. They'll try to say it was justified. That I resisted. Not after they see that, Derek said. But even as he said it, her phone buzzed from the couch where she'd left it earlier. Once, then again, in rapid succession. She stood slowly, crossed the room, and picked it up, her heart already sinking before she read the screen. Text after text, some from co-workers, others from unknown numbers, all asking the same thing in different tones. Are you okay? They're saying you attacked police. Why would you run? You need to come in. They're looking for you. It's everywhere. Derek's phone buzzed next. He stepped away to check it, his expression unreadable as he scrolled through a short list of messages from former colleagues. Some cautious, some panicked, one blunt enough to make him pause. There's a warrant out. Assaulting 2 officers. Abducting a child. You need to go dark. They're calling it a manhunt. He looked up and met Renee's eyes. They've flipped it already. She nodded, already moving back to the table, already reopening the video file. We don't have time to argue. We leak it now. No press outlet, no middleman, raw, uncut. They'll trace it. Then we use the school account. Derek hesitated. You'll lose your job. I've already lost it, she said, her voice steady. Suspended this morning. They didn't even ask what happened. He didn't push back. He opened the drive, copied the video, and plugged in the backup laptop with no name, no ID. They moved fast, working like they were back on familiar ground. He handled the upload. She wrote a short caption. Nothing dramatic, just facts. This is what really happened. Watch it before it disappears. They used a burner signal and a temporary IP tunnel, routing it through an untraceable relay server Derek had set up years ago. One of those precautions he never thought he'd need outside a mission. The file began uploading, inching its way through the progress bar like it understood the weight of what it carried. Renee stood, pacing near the window, her arms wrapped around herself, the side of her face still swollen, the blood long dried but never fully cleaned. Malik slept in the corner of the room, curled beneath a blanket, unaware that the world outside had turned against them even more in the hours since he closed his eyes. When the upload finished, Derek hit send. It went live within seconds. He pushed the laptop aside and stared at the wall, his voice low. Now we wait. But the waiting didn't feel passive. It felt like holding your breath after shouting in a canyon. waiting for the echo to come back, and not knowing what it would sound like. The first comments came fast, then the shares. But the tone, at first, wasn't what they hoped. Some of them believed the headline, "Former SEAL assaults officers in roadside ambush." Others repeated the words from cable news. "Family flees police after resisting lawful traffic stop." Renee refreshed the video page and watched the views climb. Tens, then hundreds, then thousands. But the comments still ran hot with disbelief, with accusations, with people saying she faked the injuries, that Malik was being used for sympathy, that the video was cut, that the footage was doctored. Derek stood behind her, watching it unfold. "They're not ready to believe yet." "Then we keep pushing," she said. "Because they will." And she meant it. Even as the phones buzzed with more warnings, even as the headlines continued to paint them as fugitives, even as the fear pressed tighter around their shoulders like a noose, she meant it. Because the truth was out, now, and sooner or later, someone would have to look it in the face. The wind had changed sometime during the night. Renee noticed it first. The way it came in sharper through the trees, tugging against the shutters like something impatient trying to get in. Derek had noticed it too, though he didn't say anything at first. He just stayed near the back window, eyes narrowed, one hand pressed against the old frame, while the other rested near the edge of the curtain, watching the dirt road out front, like it might try to give something away. The video had passed 1 million views by dawn, and with it came pressure, not just from strangers online, but from real places, real threats. 3 burner phones Derek had activated were now buzzing on staggered intervals, each picking up bits of chatter from private forums, dispatch leaks, and back-channel messages from people who knew enough to say something without putting it in writing. There were search patterns being drawn, patrols being reassigned, vehicles marked non-police being sent out under the radar to canvass backroads and rural corners that didn't show up on standard GPS grids. At 8:27 a.m., Derek caught movement. He said nothing, just turned slightly, one finger raised toward Renee, where she stood folding one of Malik's sweatshirts near the couch. She froze, then turned her head carefully toward the window. A white pickup, civilian model, had pulled off the main road and was creeping slowly down the tree-lined path that led toward the cabin. No markings, no sirens, but something about the way it moved made her blood go cold. Derek closed the curtain. "We have to go. Now." Renee moved fast, her voice low as she crossed to the bed where Malik was still half asleep beneath the blanket. "Baby, we have to leave. Right now. No questions. Just put your shoes on and listen to everything Dad says." Malik blinked, confused, but the urgency in her voice cut through the fog. He pulled on his sneakers with shaking hands, while Derek zipped the laptop shut and slid the backup drive into a canvas pouch beneath his shirt. The main power was already off. They hadn't used it since they arrived, but the solar rig in the back would need to be disconnected manually to avoid any signals pinging from stray devices. Renee grabbed the go-bag from behind the couch and threw 2 water bottles inside, then turned toward the back of the cabin. But Derek didn't head for the car. He pointed toward the rear crawl space instead, a low, half-covered root cellar tucked beneath the cabin's foundation, hidden behind a panel of old siding and thick with damp leaves and pine needles. It had been built for food storage during storms. Now it would have to serve a different purpose. He lifted the panel and ushered them both down carefully, helping Renee first, then lowering Malik gently into the narrow space below. It was cold, close, and smelled of wet stone and dirt, but it was silent and dark. Derek followed them in and replaced the panel, pulling it tight from the inside. Above them, footsteps passed near the side of the cabin. 3 sets, boots. Not shoes, not loud enough to be confident, not quiet enough to be friendly. A muffled knock echoed from the front door, followed by a pause. Then another knock. Harder this time, someone called out, voice casual but practiced. "Anyone home?" "Just here checking in on the property." Another voice answered him, closer now to the rear wall. "No tire marks." Looks undisturbed. Derek pressed one hand against the low ceiling above him, his eyes fixed on the single sliver of light that leaked through a crack in the panel. Malik curled close to Renee's side, his breathing shallow, one hand over his mouth as he fought not to make a sound. She rested her palm over his back, smoothing gently along his spine in a slow, steady rhythm. Something scraped across the deck above them, a boot dragging against old wood. Then silence. Renee's fingers tightened around Malik's shirt. Another voice, lower this time, almost muttered, "Could have sworn I saw movement from the road." "Nothing on thermal. Place is dead." A long pause followed. Then, "Keep looking." The footsteps shifted again, slower now, pacing, moving farther toward the woods behind the cabin. Derek checked his watch, counting under his breath. Not loud enough to be heard, just enough to mark the seconds, track the space between the sounds. He was waiting not for silence, but for consistency, for that telltale rhythm that meant the men were walking, not watching. 10 minutes passed. 15. When the panel finally creaked open again, the light was different, softer, later. Derek peeked out first, slow and cautious, his eyes sweeping the tree line. The truck was gone. No more movement, just forest, wind, and the sound of his own pulse finally starting to slow. He helped them both out, first Malik, then Renee, and led them back inside with careful steps, each one quieter than the last. They didn't speak until the door was closed behind them. "That wasn't a patrol," Renee said, her voice low, her eyes still on the door. "They didn't announce, didn't ask questions." "No," Derek said. "They weren't looking for an interview. They were looking to disappear someone." Malik looked up at them both, eyes wide, voice soft. "Are we still safe here?" Renee knelt and cupped his face gently. "For now. But we're not staying. We'll move again. We just need a little time. Just a little." Derek crossed the room and retrieved the drive from under his shirt. He placed it back on the table with a sharp breath. "We move in 1 hour. No roads, no signals. We lay low, but we don't stop." Renee nodded. "Because they're still out there. And now," Derek said, "we know how close they're willing to get." The new hideout wasn't much. An abandoned equipment barn on the edge of a fallow orchard about 30 miles south. Long forgotten by the owners and reclaimed by nature, dust clung to every surface, and the air smelled faintly of rust and dry grass. But it offered shade, distance, and just enough structure to disappear inside without drawing attention. They'd driven there without headlights, once they left the cabin, turning off all devices, leaving no trace, no signals, no patterns, no trail. Now, the morning after their near discovery, the exhaustion had finally set in. Derek sat with his back against the wooden wall, arms draped over his knees, eyes fixed on a small hole in the siding where a shaft of sun split through and cast a crooked line across the dirt floor. Renee rested nearby with Malik in her lap, the boy wrapped in one of her old sweaters, his body limp with the kind of fatigue that sleep alone couldn't erase. He hadn't cried again, but he hadn't spoken either. Just watched and listened, always quiet, always alert. Derek hadn't said much since they got there, not because there was nothing to say, but because too much had already been said. The footage was out, the truth had been shown, but they were still hunted, still painted as threats, still cornered, even as the world had started to turn its head. He pulled out one of the last working phones, checked the signal strength, and scrolled through the encrypted contact list. He found the number he needed, a man who owed him more than one favor, and who'd never once given him reason to doubt his silence. He dialed. The call rang twice before it picked up. "Derek?" The voice was cautious. "Where the hell are you, man?" "Doesn't matter. I just need to know what's happening. In town. On the ground." "What are they saying?" A pause followed. Then a deep breath. "It's chaos. The video broke everything wide open last night. First it hit social media, then local news, then one of the national anchors picked it up. They aired the whole clip, unedited. And people saw it, really saw it." Derek leaned his head back against the wall, letting the words settle. Civilians are protesting downtown. Hundreds of them. It started at City Hall, then moved to the courthouse. They're chanting Malik's name. They've got signs with your wife's face, bruised and bleeding, next to the officers' badge numbers. And when the mayor tried to downplay it this morning, it made it worse. The crowd turned. Windows broke. Squad cars got hit. Fire crews had to be called in around midnight. Renee looked up sharply. Her eyes locked on Derek as she tried to catch what was being said. He nodded to her gently, kept listening. The governor issued a statement, tried to calm it down, said there would be a review, but nobody's buying it. They want arrests. Now. And what about us? Another pause. You're still fugitives. The warrant's active. They haven't pulled it yet. But people are starting to push back on that too. Some lawyers are going public, saying it's retaliation, that it won't hold up in court. Derek exhaled slowly. Thanks, Travis. You didn't have to answer. You kidding me? I've known you for 20 years. This system should be begging you for help, not hunting your family. Just be careful. They're getting desperate. Derek hung up and set the phone down beside him, rubbing his hands over his face once, then dragging them back through his hair. The barn was quiet, save for the rustling of birds in the rafters and the steady breath of the woman and child across from him. Renee shifted closer. They know the truth now. Not everyone, he said. But enough. Then we can't keep hiding. They'll spin this again if we vanish. They'll say the silence means guilt. Derek looked at her for a long moment. So what do we do? Walk into a precinct? Put our lives in the hands of people who let this happen? No, we go above them. She sat upright now, her voice steady, not rushed. We go to the people who don't want a riot in every city. We talk to the DA's office, the Oversight Commission, someone who's not sitting behind the same badge as Maddox. We offer them something. What? Peace. Derek raised an eyebrow and she continued. We tell them we'll calm the protests, get our supporters to hold the line. No violence, no destruction. But in exchange, they drop the charges. They arrest the officers. They open a real investigation. He stared at her, weighing the idea. And if they refuse, then we give the next video to the press, the one we haven't released yet. He frowned. There isn't one. There can be. She pulled out the laptop and opened a folder where she'd quietly started editing the raw footage, adding a voiceover, overlaying still images of Malik's bruised wrists, of her bloodied face, even a clip from a town hall meeting where the police chief had promised transparency months ago. It was rough, but it was real, and it was damning. If they don't want the streets burning, they'll pick a side. Quietly, carefully, but they'll do it. Derek nodded, the idea settling into place like a loaded rifle across the table. They weren't powerless. Not anymore. Not with a nation watching. Then we get a meeting, he said. We go in on our terms, not theirs, and we don't walk in alone. Renee nodded. We bring someone with a camera, someone they can't silence, and if they still try, then the country will see it happen. They sat there for a while longer, not moving, not rushing, just breathing, planning, ready now not just to survive, but to win. The barn was still and quiet, but the weight in the air hadn't moved since the night before. The sun had started to rise behind the trees, casting long shadows through the slats in the wood, but inside, the air was thick, not from heat or dust, but from the feeling that something was closing in. Derek sat against the far wall, his elbows resting on his knees, phone in hand, staring down at the dim screen as if the silence itself was daring him to break it. Renee was beside him, her back to the post, eyes on the horizon as she watched the early light spill across the dirt. Malik was asleep again under a makeshift blanket, his breathing slow and even, his body finally relaxed after days of tension. They'd barely spoken since the escape from the cabin. It wasn't avoidance. It was calculation. They knew what had to come next, but neither wanted to be the one to say it out loud first. Derek tapped the screen twice and brought the burner to his ear. The call rang once, then again. Then a voice picked up, not rushed, not surprised. Coleman. Derek leaned forward, his voice steady. Deputy Mayor Grant. There was a beat of hesitation. You're not calling to turn yourself in. No, then say what you need to say. You've seen the footage. You know what happened. You know what those officers did to my wife and son. You've watched the riots build, and you're watching them get worse. What I want is simple. Drop the charges against my wife and me. Arrest Maddox and Renner. And announce an independent review into misconduct inside your department. A long pause followed. On the other end of the line, Derek could almost hear the man shift in his chair. You've put us in a difficult position. No, Derek said. Your officers did that. I'm giving you a way out. Grant sighed, the sound low and tired. You're asking us to sacrifice 2 officers in front of a crowd. I'm not asking. I'm offering a deal. You make the right call, and we release a statement. We tell the public we've spoken. We believe in the process, and we're willing to cooperate with a fair review. You get to keep control. We get justice. Another pause. We can't just drop the charges. That's not how it works. It's exactly how it works, Derek said. Because I also have a second video. Edited, annotated. Includes background footage. Audio from your chief's past press briefings. You think the protests are loud now? You charge us, and we release that. Everything burns. I don't respond to threats. This isn't a threat. It's a truth you're going to have to pick a side on. From beside him, Renee watched carefully, her eyes fixed on the way Derek's shoulders held tension in his muscles, but not in his voice. She didn't say a word, just waited. The silence on the line stretched. Then Grant spoke again. What are your terms exactly? Public dropping of charges. Immediate suspension of Maddox and Renner. A formal public announcement of an external investigation within 48 hours. No quiet moves. No deals behind closed doors. And in return, we tell the truth. In front of cameras, we ask for calm. We tell people to stop lighting fires and start watching closely. And we disappear after. Quietly. With our names cleared. You really think people will calm down just because you ask? I think they'll listen to my son's mother. More than they'll listen to your press secretary. Grant let out a slow breath, then said quietly, give me until midnight. Derek didn't say, thank you. Just ended the call. The barn was quiet again. Renee stood, dusting off her jeans with one hand, the other rubbing lightly at her still swollen cheek. You think he'll take it? He doesn't have a choice. She moved toward Malik, crouched to adjust the blanket around him, her voice soft but sure. If he stalls, we don't wait. Derek slid the phone back into the canvas bag and pulled out the second flash drive. The one with the edited video she'd compiled, with overlays, context, and voiceover. It was ready. It had been ready for hours. All they needed was a reason to release it. We send it to 3 outlets if the deal breaks, she said. 2 networks, 1 independent. We time the drop within an hour of the mayor's next press briefing. And we include a live link to the raw footage, so no one can accuse us of staging it. We'll be burning our last card, Derek said. And if they try to come for us after, at least the whole country will know exactly who they're dragging into court. He nodded slowly. Then, we give them till midnight. That night, they waited again. Not in fear, but in readiness. Because this time, the silence wasn't theirs to break. The wind had picked up again by late evening, brushing softly against the sides of the old barn, like it was carrying a warning. Inside, the world hadn't moved much. Renee sat with her back to the far wall, one arm cradling Malik, while the other clutched the blanket tighter around both of them, as if holding him was the only thing keeping her steady. Derek sat across from them near the door, phone resting in his palm, screen dark, signal low, the seconds stretching longer than the silence could carry. When the burner finally buzzed, the sound cut through the air like it didn't belong. He answered quickly. Grant? The deputy mayor's voice came through, slow, deliberate. We've reviewed everything. The district attorney has agreed in principle to drop the charges and suspend the officers pending investigation. Derek leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly. So, that's it? Almost. There's a condition. Derek didn't respond right away. Renee was already watching him, her body stiffening at the change in tone. "What condition?" Derek asked. Grant didn't hedge. "You meet, in person. No press, no cameras. Just you, your wife, the district attorney, the city's legal advisor, and myself. We sit down. You assure us that you won't escalate, that you'll ask your supporters to hold back once the announcement is made. And in return, we make it official, publicly. No tricks." Derek's silence held. "I'm not walking into a trap," he said at last. "You have my word that won't happen." "That doesn't mean anything to me." "It should mean something when the deal's real," Grant replied. "Look, we're putting the system on the line for this. Arresting 2 of our own, admitting fault. The mayor's already in deep with the unions. You want a full reversal? You show up. You sit down. You look us in the eye. Otherwise, it all folds." Derek closed his eyes for a second, then opened them slowly. "Where?" "The library. South entrance. Private reading room. Closed for renovations. No cameras. 1 door, 1 exit. Your terms. You bring someone if you want. Just not press. If you're serious about justice, not a spectacle, you'll show up." Derek didn't answer. He ended the call and sat still for a long moment, letting the weight of the decision sit with him before saying anything. Renee spoke first. "They changed the deal. They want us in the room." She looked down at Malik, then back at him. "That's too much risk." "I know. You believe they'll follow through?" "No." "Then why are we even considering it?" "Because if we don't go," Derek said slowly, "they kill the deal. They say we refused. They paint us like we're holding the city hostage." She lowered her voice. "And if we do go, they could bury it. Lock us up on something else. Say it was all a misunderstanding. Say we came to threaten them in person. They spin it again. They won't do it with eyes on them," he said. "Not this time. Not with how hot it's gotten." Renee looked away for a second, her breath catching. "You're sure?" "No," Derek admitted. "But we didn't come this far to blink." He crossed the room and knelt beside her, placing a hand on Malik's back. The boy stirred but didn't wake. "I need you to stay here with Travis's wife," Derek said gently. Renee looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "I'm not letting you walk in there alone." "You're not. We go together, but we bring a witness. Someone they can't shut down. Not a camera. A person. Someone whose silence they can't buy." She was quiet, then nodded slowly. "I'll make a call." 2 hours later, just past 1 in the morning, they pulled into a parking garage 3 blocks from the downtown library. The streets quiet. The curfew keeping all but patrols and late workers indoors. The lights inside the garage buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows across the walls. Renee stepped out first, scanning the lot, then helped Derek adjust the inner lining of his coat, where the second burner was hidden. Voice memo rolling, set to back up every 60 seconds. Their contact waited beside the side stairwell. A retired judge. One of the few people they trusted to sit in that room and not flinch. A man who owed Derek more than one favor from years ago, and who had seen enough to understand exactly what this meeting meant. At 1:32 a.m. they entered the building through the south wing. The hall smelled faintly of old paper and varnish, but the doors were unlocked. The reading room had been cleared. 1 long table at the center, blinds drawn, 3 figures seated already. No uniforms, just suits, just silence. They didn't shake hands. No one did. Derek and Renee sat down, the judge at their side. No introductions. Just business. Grant spoke first. "This meeting satisfies the condition. Do you still intend to de-escalate the public response once charges are dropped?" Derek didn't blink. "Yes, once it's public. Not before. And the footage you haven't released stays locked. Unless you double back on this deal." The DA leaned forward. "We have the paperwork ready. If you agree to this course, the formal announcement will go out at sunrise. Charges against you both. Gone. Warrant vacated. Officers suspended. Pending arrest and public arraignment. Independent commission to follow. Do we have a deal?" Renee looked at Derek. Derek looked at the judge. Then he nodded. "You have a deal." Nobody smiled. Nobody relaxed. They stood, hands at their sides. Nothing signed, nothing recorded. But something real had shifted. This time, the system wasn't making a decision for them. It was reacting to them. Morning arrived without fanfare. No dramatic sunrise, no sudden shift in the weather. Just the soft gray of an overcast sky hanging low over the city, like it had been holding its breath too long. But for once, the quiet didn't feel like dread. It felt like something giving way. Derek stood in front of the living room television at Travis's house, arms folded, jaw set, as the news anchor spoke in that carefully controlled tone networks used when they knew the world was watching. Confirmed this morning by the mayor's office, the city has formally dropped all charges against Derek and Renee Coleman, citing overwhelming evidence of misconduct. In a parallel move, officers Brent Maddox and Kyle Renner have been taken into custody and are facing multiple charges, including felony assault, unlawful detainment, and falsification of official reports. The arrests follow mounting public pressure and the viral release of video footage documenting the incident. Renee sat at the kitchen table with her hand resting on Malik's shoulder. The boy stared at the screen without blinking, a bowl of cereal growing soggy in front of him, his fingers gripping the edge of the chair as though the news might change if he let go. "They said his name," he whispered. Renee leaned down, kissed the top of his head. "Yes, they did, and they're not going to forget it." On the screen, the footage cut to a pre-recorded press conference. Behind the podium stood the police chief, flanked by two plainclothes detectives. No spin, no slogans, just a direct announcement. "We are confirming that the arrest warrants for Officers Maddox and Renner were executed at 6:45 this morning. Both individuals were taken into custody without incident and are currently being processed. The department will fully comply with the Oversight Commission in their investigation." The camera cut away. Derek exhaled slowly, his body still tight with the kind of tension that didn't leave just because the news said the right words. There was still too much behind them, too much ahead. But for the first time, something had landed. Not a promise, not a compromise, a reckoning. That afternoon, the family arrived at the courthouse under escort. Not because they were in custody, but because the city wanted them there, publicly, visibly. They didn't wear suits. They didn't dress for cameras. Renee wore jeans and a jacket that still bore the faint marks of that night. Derek wore the same boots, the same posture, the same silence. Malik walked between them, holding both their hands, eyes scanning the crowd of reporters and supporters waiting behind the barricades. Inside, the mood was quieter, tense. In the back corridor, away from the noise, they were led to a small observation room lined with glass. On the other side stood Maddox and Renner, wrists cuffed, seated at a processing bench as two officers filled out intake forms. Neither of them looked back at the mirror. Neither of them spoke. Renee stood still for a long moment before she broke the silence. "Do they even remember what they did to him?" Derek glanced at her, then through the glass. "They remember. They just didn't expect to answer for it." "I want to say something." Before he could stop her, she opened the door and stepped into the room. Both officers looked up at once, recognition spreading across their faces like a stain. Maddox stood instinctively, one step forward before the guard raised a hand and told him to stay put. Renner didn't move. He just stared at the floor. Renee kept her voice calm. "No yelling, no trembling. You threw me on the ground in front of my son. You hit me while he watched. And you grabbed a 10-year-old boy like he was some kind of threat." Maddox didn't answer. Renee kept going. "You thought nobody would believe us, that no one would care, that because you wore a badge and we had brown skin, the story would write itself. You thought you were protected." Still no reply. She stepped closer, her words sharper now. "You looked in my child's face and didn't see a child, and now the country's looking in yours, and they see what you are." Renner finally looked up. "I didn't hit you," he said quietly. "I didn't pull the trigger." "No," she replied, "but you didn't stop it either." Derek appeared in the doorway then, Malik just behind him. The boy didn't say a word. He just stared at the two men behind the glass, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a second, the room was silent again. Then Malik spoke, barely above a whisper. "You scared me, but I'm not scared now." Maddox blinked. That was all. They left the room without another word. Outside, the crowd had swelled. Signs held high, hands clapping, chants rising not in rage, but in relief. The city hadn't healed, but something inside it had turned. The story had changed. The lie had cracked. And the truth, raw, heavy, and unforgettable, had slipped through for everyone to see. The family walked down the courthouse steps, not as fugitives, not as victims, but as proof. Proof that sometimes justice doesn't come easy. But it comes. The house was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that came from fear or hiding, but the kind that settled slowly when something heavy had been lifted. They were back at home, not under the cover of night or behind boarded windows, but home in the way that meant something now. Renee stood in the kitchen with a warm mug in her hands, staring out the window as the morning sun bled softly through the trees behind the fence. The same trees she'd looked through 100 times before, though never quite like this. Malik sat at the dining table with a pencil in one hand and a comic book beside his schoolwork. He wasn't talking much, but he was writing again, sketching on the corner of his math sheet. Nothing big, just little drawings of capes and shadows and heroes with wide stances and big hands, all of them standing between a smaller figure and something dangerous behind them. He didn't flinch when the doorbell rang anymore. He didn't ask whether the lights should stay off or if the phone should be unplugged. He just looked up at Derek, who stepped in from the hallway and said quietly, "It's just the neighbor dropping off groceries." And then he went back to drawing. That was the difference. Renee joined Derek on the back porch an hour later, the two of them sitting beneath the awning with the breeze brushing gently past them. The flowers in the side garden had survived their absence, pushing up through the soil like they hadn't noticed the city had burned for a week. There was something about that resilience that Renee couldn't stop thinking about. "They're talking about setting up a panel," Derek said after a long pause. "Some statewide review process, new protocol, civilian complaints. They called it the Coleman Initiative." Renee raised her eyebrows slightly. "That sounds like something they name after a school." He gave a faint smile. "Probably just for show, but people are watching now." He nodded, his eyes scanning the neighborhood slowly, watching a mail carrier pull up across the street, a woman walking her dog 3 doors down, a group of kids tossing a basketball into a tilted hoop in a cracked driveway. "They know our faces now," he said, "but not as fugitives." She leaned her head against his shoulder, resting there with her hands folded in her lap. "Do you think it's really over?" He took his time answering. "No," he said at last, "but I think we're safe, and I think the right people are scared now." "That's something." Inside, Malik's voice rose. Not scared, not calling for help, just asking if he could have lunch early. It was the most ordinary question in the world. And for a moment, both Derek and Renee sat still, listening to the sound of his voice like it was proof that normal was finding its way back. Renee stood first, brushing the back of her hand across her face, not because she was crying, but because the air felt different now, less heavy, less sharp. "I'll make him a sandwich," she said. "You want anything?" "Just water," Derek replied. "I'm good." She stepped back inside, and Derek remained on the porch, eyes drifting up toward the corner of the roof where a security camera used to be. He hadn't replaced it yet. He didn't know if he would. Later that evening, the three of them sat together on the living room couch, the lights low, a movie playing that none of them had picked for any particular reason. Just noise, just movement. Malik curled between them with his head resting against his mother's side, her arm wrapped around him, thumb brushing gently across his shoulder. At one point, he looked up and whispered, "Are they really gone?" Derek glanced at him, then at Renee, and answered quietly, "They're not gone, but they're where they belong, and they can't hurt us anymore." Malik didn't ask anything else after that. He just nodded and turned back toward the screen, letting his eyes drift half shut. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Not tense, not waiting, just quiet. And that, finally, was enough. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.